So if you're looking into starting filmmaking, videography, cinematography, stuff like that, especially on a professional level, I have something I want to show you which might be instrumental to you, especially if you're just trying to gather, equipment, as a beginner and all of that. I'm going to be telling you about the camera that was released in 2014. This camera, when it was released, made the news back then, made a lot of waves back then as the first mirrorless camera that could shoot 4K video internally. And that camera has been able to hold up over the years, and even today, I feel that camera is still relevant, especially if you're just starting your journey into filmmaking. It's none other than the Lumix GH4. Yeah, the Lumix GH4. This camera right here was the camera I started with in 2022 when I started shooting professional video on mirrorless cameras. This was pretty much my first camera. This camera was given to me by a friend of mine when I was still shooting video on smartphones and all of that. He saw the creative process in what I was doing and all of that, and he felt he was upgrading his camera at that point in time, and he had this Lumix GH4 with him, and he felt, oh wow, I see what you're doing a great job and all of that. He gave me this camera back then, and he gave me the liberty of paying at a later date. He gave me the freedom to have some fun with this camera and probably make something out of it. This camera was one of the best things to happen to me in my journey of filmmaking, because even up to today, I've shot most of my professional work using this camera. Although now I have a GH6, I have a Lumix GH6 which I'm shooting on right now, but this camera has helped me to get most of my early professional video, and it has just created very beautiful memories, and it has helped me to create beautiful memories for my clients. So why is this camera so special? So generally for me, I feel anytime you want to get a camera, there are basically 5 things you should be looking out for, especially if you're a beginner. The first thing is how affordable it is and how affordable the accessories for that camera is. The second thing is the ease of use, how easy it is to use the camera, the settings and all of that, the menu and all of that, how easy it is to use. The third thing is the professional features that the camera has. Is it something you can grow into? Is it something that some of the features that it has are some things that you might not need now, but you can grow into in the future? Is it something that can be future proof for you? The fourth thing is portability and adaptability. Is the camera, especially if you're a beginner, you don't want to get something that will be a burden to you, moving around and all of that. You need something that's portable, something that can fit in your hands, something that you can use in tight spaces and all of that. You can explore a lot of things with it, and also you need something that you can adapt to other tools. For example, this camera, you can adapt it to other lenses. The fifth thing is the ruggedness and the second-hand value. You want to buy a camera that even if down the line you decide to change, you'll be able to sell for some good money. And you just want to buy something that if you're buying it second-hand from someone, it still retains most of the value. I bought this, I'm sure this camera is probably maybe like the 3rd hand or 4th hand, something like that. So calling down those 5 things to this camera, I got this camera at a very, very cheap price. So this camera actually has a small sensor. It's called a micro four thirds sensor. It is not a very common type of sensor size. It's kind of one of the smallest sensors for mirrorless cameras that we have around. But because of the sensor size, it's generally cheap, because these lenses that come with this sensor size and the mounts are usually cheap. They are small. There are a lot of varieties of it, a lot of third-party lenses that can work with this. And one of the points I mentioned about the 5 things I mentioned was adaptability too. You can adapt this mount, this micro four thirds mount, to almost any kind of lens. You can adapt it to lenses for even bigger sensors, and that is a big advantage, because you can actually get something close to what even bigger cameras that have bigger sensors can get. The accessories for these two are very affordable. I just talked about the lenses. We have filters, we have monitors, and we have extra batteries. We even have grips that you can attach to the bottom and all of that. And these things are relatively cheap compared to APS-C cameras or full frame cameras. And when I got this camera back in 2022, I sat down with this camera for like a week, and between a week and a month, I was pretty much comfortable with using this camera. I was coming from using my Samsung Note 10 Plus, which I shot most of what I did as a videographer up until 2022 when I got this. I shot pretty much every other thing I have done maybe on this channel before then. I shot everything on this Note 10 Plus. I've done a bit of professional work on this Note 10 Plus too, but I've done a lot of smartphone videography for clients using this phone. And if you want to see a review about this phone, you can look at the cards in the video somewhere up there. You can check the links in the description. You see a full review of this phone and how this phone can help you as a creative getting to move from the smartphone to the mirrorless camera world, which was like the pro stuff. One would think that it was going to be very difficult. Yeah, you are learning new terminologies, you're learning new stuff. What is shutter speed, what is aperture, and all of those things, and how those things come together, the physics behind how to take a good shot, how to take a good picture, how to get a good framing, and all of that. That seems like a lot, but within a week and a month I was able to learn using this camera, and the learning curve wasn't that bad. I really sat down with it though. I dedicated a lot of time, binged on YouTube videos and all of that, but it took me no time to get used to this camera. So I feel this camera is something you can really learn on, and it actually has some professional tools, things like zebra lines that can help with your exposure. It has focus picking, a lot of professional stuff. You can shoot in Cine D, which is kind of like vlog, and you can also shoot in DCI 4K. You can shoot in anamorphic on this camera. So if you have an anamorphic lens, you can actually put an anamorphic lens on this camera, shooting anamorphic and all of that. This might sound like big stuff to you if you're just getting into professional videography, but basically what I'm just trying to say is that this camera had a lot of professional features, even despite the fact that this camera was released in 2014. And these features are features that you can really grow into. You don't have to use everything. There are things that you can grow into as time goes on. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to use everything. I didn't use everything from day one. From when I started shooting, I didn't know there was anything like Cine D and all of that. It was probably maybe in the second month, that's when I started shooting on those kind of stuff and everything. I mean, this camera shoots 4K up to 24 frames per second. It shoots slow-mo in full HD, that's 1080p, up to 96 frames per second. You can basically put this on a tripod and sit at a distance and adjust your settings, remotely control when you want to start and stop recording and all of that, all from your smartphone, which is a good thing. That's kind of intuitive. And even though this sounds crazy, this camera still has a flash. Yeah, that's a flash on top here, which that may not be really useful and all of that, but if you are into amateur photography, that really helps. You don't need to buy another flash on top to take certain kind of pictures. There are modifications you can use to actually get good flash photography. You can do some reflection, bounce it off some white paper and everything to make the flash come out well on your subject and all of that. So it's kind of like a all-in-one kind of workstation for photography and videography. It's more of a video-centric camera, but it can also do some photography. And when looking out for a camera, you shouldn't only look out for the video aspect, you should also look out for the audio aspect. Can this camera take in audio? Do you have to record audio separately? Does it have a port for an external microphone? How well does it do? How well does the external microphone sound when you record it on your video? Does it have monitoring? Can you monitor what you're hearing when you are taking a video? And this camera has everything. You can record video internally using the microphones that are in the camera. It also has a port for using external microphones. It also has a headphone jack where you can use to monitor your live recording. So as you're recording, you can monitor and know, okay, is there noise or not? Am I recording something good or not? And all of that. And so basically, like I said, this camera is an all-in-one solution for your video needs and all of that. And the preamps for the audio on this camera are pretty good. They're not fantastic, but they're not bad at all. They are quite good compared to even some cameras that we have today. The preamps on this Lumix GH4 are actually good enough. So I've been praising the camera and all of that. Definitely there are some cons that this camera has. It's an old camera, it's not a new camera, and so there's some things that are not good enough, some things where it's lacking behind. And top on that list I would say, is the autofocus and the low light capability. Now, most of Lumix cameras use a technology called the DFD autofocus, which is not really a fantastic autofocus system. However, for most Lumix cameras now, they've shifted from the DFD autofocus system to the phase detect autofocus system, or the hybrid phase detect autofocus system basically. And so the autofocus on Lumix cameras are now much better. But for most of their old cameras, especially cameras released around the time we had the GH4, the GH5, even up to the GH6, we had the DFD autofocus. The autofocus works. It's not that it doesn't work, but it's not all that fantastic. If you want to rely solely on your autofocus, this might disappoint you. But if you are focusing manually, you have absolutely no problem. And then in low light, this, because it's a small sensor, is one of the smallest sensors when it comes to mirrorless camera, it's a micro four thirds sensor. It doesn't gather as much light, and because of that, if you're using this camera in low light, you will need to light your scene properly to be able to get enough of light in your footage and not have noise and all of that. Because if you use this in low light and you don't light your footage very well, you will have a lot of noise in your final product. And also because it's a smaller sensor and it cannot take so much light, usually the depth of field when you're taking images is usually deeper. That means it doesn't really have that blurry background stuff that you have when you see videos and pictures that makes things like portrait pop out and all of that. It can give you quite some good ones, especially when you use very fast lenses of this camera, but not as much as what you have on full frame cameras. Also, the sensor on this camera is not stabilized. So on phone cameras you have this optical image stabilization, electrical image stabilization, OIS, EIS and all of that. So the lenses are kind of like stabilized, but on this camera we have no form of stabilization at all for the sensor, and so you can have a lot of shaky footage if you don't use this on a gimbal, or if you are not stable enough with your handheld shot and all of that. And that might be a downside, but if you're using this on a tripod or in a gimbal, you don't have any issues. But one trick I do sometimes is to use slow-mo, especially if slow-mo kind of works in the situation that I am in. Aside all of that, this camera is a fantastic camera. I love the grip of this camera. It's really kind of small, and all the buttons and everything are just in the right place. It has dials on the right and on the left side, which are just just on the right place. It makes it just feel good and all of that. I love the grip and the feel of this. My hand just fits just perfectly well. It's kind of small, but I love how petite it is. I can take this on a travel. One other big downside to this camera is that it doesn't have a full HDMI out. It actually has a micro HDMI out, which can easily get jammed and get spoiled, the pins and all of that. My micro HDMI on this camera is actually not working anymore, but I have a GH6 now which has a full HDMI. But by and large, I've shot weddings on this camera, I've shot corporate events on this camera, I've shot documentaries on this camera, I've shot a lot on this camera, and it just comes out very well. If you have any questions about this camera, you can ask in the comment section below. Currently, this is my B camera. My Lumix GH6 is my A camera for the kind of work that I shoot. So is the Panasonic Lumix GH4 relevant today? Even though it's a 2014 camera, I would say a big yes. Gear is expensive now, and for most things online now, what people just want to see is your story. How well can you tell a story with your gear? Nobody's looking for how many of you know whether this video I'm shooting here, whether I shot it in 720p or 1080p or 4K and all of that. What you're looking for is the story I have to tell, is the information I have to give to you. And if you're able to tell a good story, no matter the gear you're using, how you tell your story is what matters. So if you're an upcoming creator and all of that, what I would say to you is just go out there and shoot something. Start something, start with what you have. If you can't afford the big things, you can get a GH4, you can get even a cheaper camera. Just start shooting something. And I'm sure that if you have a good story, there is no limits to what you can achieve. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for staying to the end. Subscribe, like, and all of those things, and see you on the next video.